be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus departed from there and came to his native place, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What kind of wisdom has been given him? What mighty deeds are wrought by his hands? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his native place and among his own kin and in his own house." So he was not able to perform any mighty deed there, apart from curing a few sick people by laying his hands on them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. The Gospel of the Lord. Well, today brings us to Mark chapter 6, and we know how Mark has been focusing or emphasizing the need for faith. And of course, everything seems to come to a screeching halt today in today's reading. So here we are in Mark chapter 6. It's the first 6 verses. By the end of the Gospel of Mark chapter 5, which was the last chapter where we've been spending some time on that the last couple weekends, there's this enormous momentum that's been created. What have we seen and heard? If you're following the gospel, Jesus has proclaimed the kingdom of God, and he has demonstrated the kingdom of God and its presence with healings, with exorcisms, with the subduing of the elements of nature, and even raising a dead child back to life. Crowds of people have experienced liberation, healing, and this tender compassion of Jesus Christ. And so the kingdom of God looks like it's coming on strong, that is, until now. Suddenly, the mighty works that hostile opponents, demons, diseases, and death could not stop come to this seemingly grinding halt. The mighty deeds of God worked through Jesus are temporarily blocked by an even greater obstacle: unbelief or disbelief, or, as we would say, a lack of faith, as it's commonly translated: emotion-filled loyalty, commitment, and solidarity. That's how they understood faith. And we just say faith, but it's an emotion-filled loyalty, commitment, and solidarity to a person. That's how they understood faith, but we just say lack of faith, but it's unbelief, disbelief. This is the main obstacle. And so in his own hometown of Nazareth, Jesus is unable to work any mighty deeds. Not that his power is suddenly limited, but rather the people are deprived of experiencing his power and God's own life by refusing to believe in him. It's just a simple refusal to believe, and that blocks God's healing power. And so the greatest obstacle that stops the power of God from working in our lives, too, is unbelief. And most of the time, we are unaware of our unbelieving due to this obstinacy of heart rooted in self-pride, which must give way to weakness and powerlessness. That's the thesis here, if you will. All right, we have this obstinacy. We are hard of face, as Ezekiel puts it in the first reading. And this has to give way to weakness and powerlessness, as St. Paul tells us. Weakness and powerlessness. So the people, they're astonished at Jesus, not by his wisdom and authority, which is the usual case, but by what seems to be inappropriate and out of place for him. To them, Jesus is that little village boy that used to play in Joseph's workshop. He's an average craftsman, and now he's acting beyond his honor status according to the minds and the judgment of the crowds. And so the people, they're convinced that they know all there is to know about Jesus, as their questions show this principle of familiarity breeds contempt. Where did this man get all this? What kind of wisdom has been given him? But look at these mighty deeds that are wrought by his hands that we've heard about. Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary? That's a veiled slur, okay, because everyone is identified by their father. And so this, of course, means then that the people are also questioning his parentage as well. Luke will correct that error. He says the son of Joseph, but Mark is getting the point across here. Is he not the carpenter, son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And so they think they know everything there is to know about Jesus. So they took offense at him. The word is scandalizomai, to stumble over an obstacle. Of course, they're not stumbling over Jesus, they're stumbling over their own disbelief. So the idea that someone so familiar to them could be inaugurating the kingdom of God before their very eyes, or be God's anointed one, or be his prophet or representative, scandalizes them. I guess we could say the 80% of Catholics that don't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist have been scandalized. They can't really believe that what happens on this altar, this bread sitting in this ciboria, these bowls, are going to turn into the very living, breathing, beating heart of Jesus Christ. They just can't believe it. That the Eucharist is such a miracle like that happens at every Mass. That ordinary bread and wine are turned into the very living, breathing, beating heart of Jesus Christ, and we eat it. They just can't believe it. It's the disbelief that has held them in prison, that has constrained their freedom, that has squelched all of their potential. Disbelief, like I said last weekend, it's a nasty word, it's an ugly word, it's a dirty word, disbelief. And so they're scandalized. Their questions are not of a sincere pursuit of truth, but of an indignant skepticism. They ask all the right questions except with the wrong attitude. And due to their self-pride, they are closed off to the possibilities of God. Jesus, as a teacher, inaugurating the kingdom of God, simply did not conform to their preconceived ideas about how God would, could, and should act. And moreover, their attachment to their preconceived ideas became this obstacle of believing, this obstacle to believing, and therefore they lack faith. So acute is the people's unbelief that he was not able to perform any mighty deeds there apart from curing a few sick people for which he laid his hands on. Now, Mark highlights the necessity of faith in Jesus as a basic openness to God's power as the proper disposition for receiving God's healing. While the people are astonished at Jesus, ironically, he's amazed at their lack of faith or their unbelief. It's Jesus who is amazed. And like Jesus' own relatives and acquaintances, we too often resist the prophetic word or the teachings of the church due to obstinacy of heart rooted in a self-pride. He's talking about us. We live in a culture of disbelief that halts the mighty works of God, harming us, blocking the reception of Jesus' healing, freedom, love, and mercy. The people of Jesus' hometown and most people of the world today are all too willing to disbelieve in the reality of the kingdom of God among us right now. Most disbelief and faithlessness are caused by these false expectations or these preconceived ideas about how God is supposed to act. That's what's crippling us. We can be too attached to what we think we believe. which may be entirely wrong. Human beings have a tendency to live in a somewhat of an imagined reality where we invent God and often through our prayers unconsciously direct his actions for our lives, but they obviously don't work. We don't really realize we're doing that. We have a tendency to do that. Instead, we must live in this objective reality that is presented to us. There are a lot of people who have difficulty grasping reality that's right in front of them. And they continue to tell themselves different things because of these beliefs that they are so attached to. Like these crowds, these people of his hometown, these preconceived ideas. When it comes to God trying to reveal what he's doing in our lives, it's not easy. And we continually question, even in times when we're sure of it, we still go back and question it. For instance, this vocation of the priesthood that I have taken on. When things get tough in your marriages, those vocations that you've taken on. When things are difficult in your marriage, you question, was this the right thing for me to do? 30 years later, I'm only at 11. Got 8 years of seminary behind that too, so that's 19 since I left the automotive industry. But nonetheless, we have to keep rethinking, keep staying open to what God is trying to reveal in our lives. And so we all must be careful not to make God into what we wish him to be or what we believe he should be doing due to our preconceived ideas. So to accept Jesus on God's terms, we need humility, a spiritual poverty as demonstrated by St. Paul. He was praying, we believe he had an eye disease, so he was like really ugly to look at. So we believe that he had some kind of eye infection or something that was continuous. And so then I think that was the thing that we understand him to have had, that he asked 3 times for it to be taken away. And his answer was, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. And so God gains entry into our lives through weakness and powerlessness. We wouldn't think of it that way, but St. Paul, the great theologian, tells us that his power reaches perfection in us when we are able to admit our powerlessness. His power reaches perfection in us when we allow ourselves to be weak and admit that we are powerless before the Lord. Now, you heard me talk before. I don't mean powerlessness out of fear before the devil. This is different. I mean powerlessness before God in accepting his will in faith. For instance, when things do not go the way I prayed them to, I'm powerless. But in faith, I still trust in this God. I still trust in this God. Realizing I have nothing and am weak and helpless on my own, I must lean into God so that he may be my strength. This is humility. So faith is God's doorway into human hearts, but it can only be opened from within. And so, is St. Paul's weakness that he describes then a prerequisite for faith?